It began with whispers. Not the whispers of any obvious voice, however. These whispers seemed to come from the air itself. I felt them more than I heard them. They seemed to plead with me for something in words I couldn't understand, coming closer, next to my ear, and then hastily moving away. What did they want with me? Did I even really hear them? Or was it just... I swatted an insect away from my ear and looked up. My two hiking companions, my best friend Alex and his brother Philip, trekked onward, unaware of the strange trail of thought I had followed while staring down at my boots. I glanced around, feeling uneasy somehow. That was what I got for letting myself fall into a daydream. It was somewhere around 4 in the afternoon, and the sun still lit up much of the forest floor. There were dark patches here and there where the light was blocked by a thick canopy of dark green leaves. I watched these patches as I walked, perhaps subconsciously fearful that the sources of the pleading whispers were hiding in the shadow. By the time we came across the fence, nearly an hour later, I had all but forgotten my vague fears. The 8-foot-tall chain-link barrier was topped by a spiral of barbed wire and stretched ominously into the distance in either direction. The fence looked well maintained, not rusting anywhere as far as I could tell. It also looked strangely out of place. There was absolutely nothing man-made for miles in any direction as far as we knew. "Well, this is weird," said Alex. "Tell me about it," I replied as I stepped closer to the fence, looking through it into the continuing forest beyond. "Why do you think it's here?" asked Philip, analyzing the sheet of paper he had pulled out of his backpack. "I don't see anything at all on the map." "Maybe it's new. How old is your map?" I asked him. "I don't know. I bought it at the gas station yesterday," Philip replied. "Well, whatever it is, it's on our route," interjected Alex. "So, we have two options. Through or around. What'll it be, boys?" "Very funny, Al," I laughed. "If you want to test out that barbed wire, be my guest." Alex gazed up at the sharp metal wire and exclaimed, "Around it is, then!" Phil raised the camera hanging around his neck, snapping a picture of the mysterious fence in the middle of nowhere, and with that, we set off once more, following it eastward. As we walked, I gradually fell back into my own head, and it didn't take long for the whispers to begin again. It was unintelligible gibberish, not even words. More likely it was a combination of the wind whistling through the leaves and the buzz of insects. I dragged my hand along the chain link as I listened, and I imagined what a million insects would say to me if they could speak. A fly landed on my arm just as I thought this, and stayed there even though I was still moving at a brisk pace. If that fly could communicate with me, what would it say? Oh, of course there were the simple answers. Perhaps it would ask for food, or just spout nonsense. But there were also more interesting answers. What if flies had something important to say? What if flies knew all the secrets of the universe, but couldn't share their knowledge with anyone, simply because they lacked the means to physically express themselves? The fly was standing motionless on my arm, so I asked it, "Do you have something you'd like to tell me?" The fly rubbed its front legs together as flies do, and then I swear it nodded its head. I stopped walking. Had my eyes tricked me? Could flies even move their heads? My abrupt stop seemed to frighten the fly, and it took off into green oblivion. "Hey!" Alex called from a few yards ahead of me. "There's a huge hole in the fence up here. Check this out!" I snapped out of my trance, still not even sure if what I thought I'd seen had been real. Alex was waving us over. I followed Philip, and together we examined the gaping hole which had been torn in the fence. "Is that blood?" asked Philip, as he clicked his camera again. "Yeah, and tufts of fur, too," I noted. "I think an animal crawled through here." "And look at that," said Alex, pointing at the forest floor beneath the hole. "I think those are bits of antler that broke off. At least, that's what they look like." Philip took a knee and snapped a close-up of the shards. "The metal is bent toward us. Something really wanted out of there," said Philip. "This day just keeps getting weirder," I responded. I then noticed something hanging on the fence a few feet from us. "There's a sign over there," I said, pointing toward it. We were all eager to know to whom the fence belonged, so we headed over to take a look. The notice read, Willow Foundation. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. We all studied it. Why is this here? There's nothing out here. There aren't even roads, exclaimed Alex. Philip took a picture of the shiny metal warning. I was just about to voice my own thoughts when the strangest thing any of us had ever experienced took place. Hundreds of flies suddenly flew toward us from every direction and simultaneously landed on the sign. The three of us leaped back, away from the swarm. The flies, once they had landed, crawled over and under each other, buzzing faintly. What the hell? Philip whispered. A few moments of silence passed, during which I imagined my two friends were trying to rationalize the behavior of the flies just as I was. Now I knew this wasn't a daydream. This was real. The silence was broken when Alex turned to Philip and said, Now would be a good time to take a picture. Yeah, Philip replied quietly as he raised his camera. But in an instant, the flies were taking off in every direction. Not one of them was left on the sign. Great going, Phil, Alex said, punching his brother in the arm. You scared them off. You told me to take the picture, Phil protested. What just happened? I asked, interrupting the little squabble. I've got nothing, Alex said, shaking his head. I gazed up at the looming fence once more. I didn't like it. The fence, the hole, the flies. It was all filling me with apprehension. After a few minutes of discussing what we had just seen, we hiked back over to the hole in the fence, and Philip noticed that there was blood on the ground as well as on the chain link. All of us were looking for answers at that point, so we decided to follow the trail, which led away from the fence. We had only walked for a couple of minutes before we came upon a small, weather-beaten, deserted shack, which looked as if it had been built 100 years ago. The trail of blood led straight up to the doorway. Cautiously, we crossed the threshold. Inside, we found the source of the blood. It was a large deer, but unlike any deer we had ever seen. The buck had antlers growing out of almost every square inch of its body. The exceptions were the legs, but even those had growths visible beneath the rotting skin. It was covered in flies which buzzed around the carcass, landing on the dead flesh and flying off again once they had finished feasting. The three of us silently gazed at it, trying to take in the macabre sight. What do you think happened to it? Asked Alex. Probably born that way. Genetic defect or something, I replied. Philip said nothing and knelt down to examine the corpse more closely. Don't touch it, Alex scolded. I'm not. I just want to take some pictures. Philip lifted his camera again and snapped a couple of shots of the deformed deer before getting back to his feet. He held the camera screen close to his face to check his photographs, but sighed with frustration. Flies were on the lens, he told us. Alex was shaking his head as he stared at the body. He muttered, After the flies on the sign back there, I honestly don't know if I can say this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. It's definitely up there, though. I had to agree. I just kept seeing that fly nodding its head at me. Bizarre would have been the word I used, though. The sun set, casting long shadows through the forest and deepening the dark places I couldn't help but watch out of the corners of my eyes. We set up tents and built a fire. We were close to the shack, but not too close. We didn't want to think about the deformed deer, much less smell it. As we worked, I could sense the buzzing whispers every once in a while. They were like tendrils trying to weave their way into my mind. Disturbing thoughts I didn't need when I was in the woods, surrounded by nothingness. I didn't tell the guys about them. I was still trying to convince myself it was all in my imagination. 30 minutes later, we were all lounging around the fire eating baked beans and jerky, trying to forget about our weird experiences and get back to having a good time. The illusion of normalcy was broken, however, when we heard a twig snap near the camp. What was that? Asked Philip, suddenly sitting up in alarm. Alex and I were surveying the darkness outside the range of the fire, looking for an answer to his question, when we spotted the source of the noise. There was a man standing just yards away in the dark, his features barely illuminated. I gasped when I saw him, not having been expecting to see another human being so far out in the wilderness. Who's there? I yelled at him. The man did not respond, but stepped closer into the light of the fire. He was disheveled with a long gray beard. He wore torn, dirty clothes and hiking boots, the toes of which had long since worn away. He appeared to be in his 60s, but it was hard to tell under all the filth. We watched him warily as he silently continued to approach. "What do you want?" I tried again. My muscles were tensed, and I was ready for a fight. I imagined the others were too. This proved to be unnecessary, though, when the old man casually seated himself across the fire from us. "They've told me of their agony," he began. "They want freedom, but they have been cursed from the day they first felt life." We said nothing and cast furtive glances at each other. "They came from behind the fence. The willow men made them, just like they made that deer in the shack over there," continued the old man, jerking his thumb backward. "What are you talking about?" asked Philip. "Yeah, and who are you?" asked his brother. I said nothing. When the old man had mentioned willow men, I had begun to hear the whispers again, and as he spoke, they grew louder. The old man ignored my companion's questions and went on speaking. "The flies have spoken to me for such a long time. It started out as whispers, but now they are all I can hear. I'm an old man and I can't help them." He looked directly at me then. "You must help them. They have chosen you." A picture was beginning to form in my mind, but I was still missing so many pieces. The whispers made it harder to think, but I asked, "What do you mean?" "Oh, come on, man," interjected Alex as he turned to me. "Let's just pack up and get away from—" He cupped his hand over his mouth and covertly whispered, "Mister, I'm going to murder you in your tent tonight." Ignoring Alex, I just repeated my question to the old man. "What do you mean?" He replied, "They've told me of their agony. The flies see more than you or I ever will, and their intelligence far exceeds ours. But these beings, these beautiful beings, are trapped in the most pitiful bodies, living the shortest lives. Imagine then their pain, their suffering. You must help them find their creators. I cannot." The buzzing of whispers around me intensified to the point that it was deafening. Alex stood up and clapped his hands together. "Okay, story time is over." He then turned to Philip and me. "We are leaving right now. Leave the tents. We can maybe come back for them later. We're getting away from the nut job. Come on," he quietly ordered. The old man was still staring into my eyes, and the jumble of pleading whispers still filled my ears. I couldn't move. I didn't know if I believed what he had said, or if I was simply experiencing the same strange state of consciousness I had been all day. But I had a decision to make. After Philip and Alex had picked up their packs and mine, Alex snapped his fingers in my face and said, "Snap out of it, let's go." And right then, with the old man smiling at me, and the flies whispering in my ears, I made my decision. Turning to my friend, I asked, "Can't you hear them? I have to help them. They're in agony."